What is up, Beat family? I am back with another video with my wonderful wife, Jennifer. You guys have been asking to get her back on the channel, and super excited to have her here to talk about a subject that is very rarely discussed in church, and that is how to have better sex. Now, once again, this is for married couples only, all right? So once again, if this is something that you're viewing and you're single, this may or may not be the video for you, or you might be engaged and you want to, file this away for later, then that's great. But we want to talk about this because I think sometimes people think that you put two people in a room and they are attracted to each other, they get married, and then it should just be on and popping and sex should be perfect. You never have to work towards anything. Everything is perfect. But I do believe that this is something that couples need to work on depending upon what season they're in.
There's a misconception, but the one thing that is true is that sex in marriage was intended to be a gift. It was intended to be beautiful. And so there's nothing wrong with having that expectation, but how do we make that reality?
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to share a little bit about our journey, be a little bit transparent, but more importantly, you guys didn't click on this video to hear our journey. We really want to give you all some tips. If you're married and, or maybe you're looking to get married, just file it away for later. All right. Because we want to give you guys some tips on how you can improve in this area. So let's talk about, first and foremost, seasons.
Yes.
Right. Let's talk about seasons because things can be different in different seasons. So the first season that we went into when we got married,
yes,
we were both, we didn't have any kids.
No kids.
First marriage.
Yep.
And what was it like then? I mean, we were in a different season at that point.
Absolutely. So there is so much anticipation leading up to marriage, and then also sex in marriage, right? So let me just go back a little bit to say we talked about it in premarital counseling, but it's different when you talk about it and then theoretically and then in reality. So the season we were in when we first got married is we were, I guess it's a term called DINK, dual income, no kids. That's the terminology now. And so we were living the DINK life, right? Mm-hmm. We were both working. We didn't have any kids. We had a dog. We still had the dog, but we had a lot of time. We had a lot of time in our hands. And so
very few stressors.
Very few stressors. So it was, for me, I think, everything that I expected it to be, because there weren't that many limitations that were preventing us from exploring and just really looking at sex for what it was intended to be in marriage.
Yeah, I would agree. And so one of the things we really want to help you all understand is that the expectations that you have in one season, it's not always the exact same thing that you can expect in a different season. So we are now in a very different season now. We have two kids, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and there's a lot of different things. We're not going to call them distractions because kids are not distractions. They are a blessing from the Lord, right? But they will come into our bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning, whenever they're young. You might have to get up in the middle of the night. You have to do the bottle duty. You have to feed them, or they pee in their bed, or whatever it is. And you have a lot of things. You have fatigue.
Right.
You're dealing with fatigue, right? And then you might be able to speak from this perspective, but sometimes depending upon what's going on with your body, you just may not always feel sexy. You may not always feel appreciated. You feel tired. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of how things have changed a little bit in this season.
Absolutely. And Alan shared a few points, kids. I think kids is a lot of times the easier thing to point out, but it could be health issues. It could be surgeries. It could be any limitations that you have, distractions that it requires a little bit more intentionality. So as seasons changed for us, what was that like for you? And let's talk about expectations.
Yeah, let's talk about expectations.
Just expectations.
Yeah. That's another point, right? So it's very important to talk about your expectations, not just before marriage. People always talk about before marriage.
Right.
As seasons change in your marriage, it's important to continue to talk about what your expectations are. Because I know whenever we got married, I didn't see any reason why, we couldn't have sex every day or several days a week. And, in my mind, I'm like, well, what would be the reason why we would not, right? And so, she may have had a different perspective, a different expectation. But now that we're in this life with two young kids, I've had to adjust my expectations, not because of desire. We both still desire each other, but sometimes we're just tired.
Absolutely. And one thing that we learned in premarital counseling is that the number one way, or the fastest way to get disappointed, is when you have unmet expectations. And so I think naturally you come into marriage with expectations. Mm-hmm. Good expectations, right? Sex is good. Sex can be frequent, but you want to be careful not to connect those expectations to past experiences.
Ooh,
and we definitely talked about that, but didn't talk about it because there's a part of expectations that are connected to your past experience that can now create unrealistic expectations for your spouse. Yeah. And so in the beginning of our marriage, this season, while we're still talking about seasons and expectations, is we wanted to communicate as much as we can, as transparent as we can, but also and I think you can speak for yourself too, needed to almost wipe my plate clean of what I expected you to do based on past experiences, past desires, current desires, and really eliminate that. Because now I was setting you up for something that
was in your past.
Was in my past.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, if you are single and you're watching this is the reason why we stress so much the importance of waiting until you get married. Because the more experiences you have before you get married, you're inevitably going to carry those experiences into the bedroom with your future spouse. Absolutely. And so it's not something you're consciously going to do, but it's natural. Human nature is going to start to make comparisons. And this is the thing that we learn. And just, if you don't get anything else out, get this. It is not fair to compare single sex with married sex. It's not fair to do that, right? Because when you're single, you have no stressors at all. You have no responsibilities. You guys are just hanging out, having a good time. But when you get married, you have a lot of pressure. You have a lot of responsibilities. You're seeing this person differently. You're seeing them without any makeup. You're seeing them whenever their hair is not done. You're seeing them in different states. Whenever you're dating, you only see them typically in their best state most of the time, right? So to compare your experiences when you were footloose and fancy free to now you're living and sharing a space with someone and they're getting on your nerves, you got stress, you got fatigue, you got all this other stuff that you're dealing with, it's not a fair comparison.
Right. Hopefully they don't look too different without makeup than with makeup, and then scary.
I mean, no, you don't. I mean, you look the same.
But,
you wake up the same way every day.
But yes, but those are how your past experiences, or just when you went on a date with someone, you could be super excited to see them because you were single, and every time you saw them, you were excited, right? Carrying that and having that same expectation in marriage, and so that's what we really tackled during the first year of marriage. And kind of getting through that season.
Yeah. So I want to transition to give you guys another thing that we have implemented that has really, really helped us. And we call it the no pressure rule.
Yes.
The no pressure rule, right?
Yes.
So what we realized was that we both brought expectations once again into the bedroom. And because of those expectations, we both were experiencing this idea of pressure to perform, pressure to do this, pressure to do that. And it created all this anxiety in our bedroom to where it was just eroding our intimacy.
Yeah. And women, I want to speak to you for a little bit about how our desires can change in different seasons. And it has nothing to do with our spouse.
And that's hard for us to understand.
Very hard. And not only understanding that as women, but communicating that in a loving way that doesn't crush your ego or crush your confidence. And so I definitely noticed a significant change when our first child came. And remember, we're coming out of this season of Dink Life, the
Footloose Fancy Free.
Footloose Fancy Free. And now our first child is here, and my desire changed significantly. And I'm sure that was hard because, once again, I didn't do as well as communicating it to him, but I did learn that I had to at some point let him know, this is not connected to you. I still desire you, and you are still the most desirable in my eyes. I just have a change and a shift in my sexual desire.
And that was really hard for me to understand, because in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if you have a desire for me, then your desire for sex ought to be really high. But if you do not have a desire for sex, that means you do not have a high desire for me. And I could not really understand, what she was trying to say. It almost felt like she was trying to make me feel good by saying it like, oh, it's not you, it's me, that type of thing. Right.
And that brings us to the next point of just, while we're talking about communication, it was so important to understand that women and men are different. I know that you hear that, but just because I don't have a desire and I communicate that to him doesn't mean he will interpret it that same way. Men and women are just different. And so with that, I still understood, though, just because my desire is not there, let's going back to just creation and what God intended sex to be is a blessing, beautiful in marriage. That doesn't mean that we could not communicate and come up with some creative ways so that your expectations or just your desires were still fulfilled, even though I had a shift in my desire.
Yeah, so that'd be another point that we would want to bring up, right? Is that, and this is so critical, like if your desire is not where you want it to be, where it once was, where your spouse wants it to be, you still have an obligation as a spouse to find a way as best you can to meet your spouse's needs. Now, once again, within reason, okay? So if your spouse is like 10 times a day, like, no, that's expectations. We need to talk through that.
Right.
Or if your spouse is mistreating you, or if you have a headache, you're not feeling well, like we get all that. But we're just saying, generally speaking, right? If your desire is kind of at a 2 and your spouse's desire, because we're not going to say husband, because it could be the other way around, all right? But your spouse's desire is maybe at an 8, are you able to come out of yourself and to be able to try to meet your spouse's need and maybe get them to the place where you're meeting their needs at a 6 or a 7 or something like that, even though you may not have that same desire. But with that being said, this is another tip that I want to give you, unless you want to kind of follow up on that.
No. I think that was really good.
Okay. So this is another tip, and this is for the fellas. And listen, I got to take my own medicine. Sometimes the reason why our wives aren't necessarily in the mood as much as we would like them to be is because, look, guys, we may not be doing what we need to do to A, set the atmosphere in the home, as my wife has told me many times. I want to be more romantic. I want this, I want that. Okay. Need to do better at that. But also, more importantly than just flowers and, setting the atmosphere, am I meeting her emotional needs? Because for a lot of women, it's very difficult for them to connect physically, sexually, if they don't feel connected to us emotionally. Right. And so I know that's something that I want you to speak to, because I know that's something that we have talked about a lot. And when we feel disconnected, it's like, okay, how am I supposed to just jump into bed with you and just be all ready to go?
Yes. And, you've heard the saying that women are emotional, men are physical. And you can decide if you believe that or not. But I would say that just in general, women do tend to be more emotional, and our emotionality, which is a good thing, is connected to our sexuality. And so it might be easier for a man to get in the mood than it is for a woman to get in the mood, depending on where she is emotionally. And I went through a season of postpartum depression. I went through a season of just some hormonal change, and it affected my desire and my sexuality. And so it was very important for Alan to understand that, so that instead of focusing on meeting my sexual desire needs, it was almost fixing the emotional and focusing on that, and it just connected to the physical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. So So once again, if you are, if you're a guy out there and you're watching this and, your wife is not, doesn't have the same desire as you, or maybe she doesn't have any desire at all, just be encouraged to know that there could be some things that you can do. And you shouldn't do these things so that you can have better sex. You should do them just because you love her and she's your wife, right? So I should be meeting her emotional needs, but you very well might find out that whenever you just say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to focus on this, this physical for right now. I'm just going to really focus in on pouring into my wife, meeting her emotional needs. You might very well find out that that transfers directly over to the physical realm. Now, one of the things that you talked about that, was really, really important to you was making sure that I did not touch you the only time I was touching you was when I wanted something from you.
Yes.
And so we as men, we need to do a much better job at non-sexual touch, because I know you can speak to this. I want you to speak to this, because if the only time she feels me touching her is when I'm in the mood, that sends the message to her that she's only worth touching when I can get something back in return.
Yes. And, that goes back to that emotional connection, right? You've heard the saying that intimacy starts way before the bedroom. And so touching being an act of intimacy, if it is only expressed in the bed when the expectation is an output, then we start to connect touching or certain types of intimacy with only sexual. And so it was important for me to feel loved throughout the day, to feel appreciated throughout the day before we got into the bedroom. It was important for me to hear some words of affirmation or just encouragement that started before the bedroom. And what that started to do was communicate his desire for me more than just sexual, which we know is there. We got married. We love each other. And so one thing that I want to say is that it is very important to be the most desirable in your spouse's eyes. What does that mean? It means a lot of things, but it does mean that sometimes it's easy to get your affirmation from social media. It's easy to get your affirmation from others, your girlfriends complimenting you, your fellas saying, hey, your boss, your colleagues. But if you hear all of that affirmation and you don't hear it from your spouse, that too can communicate a lack thereof, which might not be there, but that communication of striving to be the most desirable in your spouse's eyes helps that connection before the bedroom.
Yeah. And that's a whole nother point, right? Is one of the things that I really, really want to encourage you guys to do along those lines is to, if you're having struggles in this area, communication is such a key element. And when people always throw that word around, communicate, but how do you actually communicate? Like, you really have to drill down deep, and you have to be willing to be honest with this person as to exactly what is going on in your mind, in your mental space, in your emotions, physical, your body. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel desirable. I don't feel sexy. I don't like my body, whatever it is, because you could be hiding behind something that you're not communicating to your spouse, and your spouse is on the other side wondering, what in the world is going on? What has changed? Is it me? And if you would just communicate and be bold enough and be honest about that, then and only then can you guys work towards, getting healing in that area.
And one thing I noticed, and I love Song of Solomon's, Song of Solomon is when it talks about, if you see their communication, they are communicating. I mean, it is a dialogue between a man and a woman. And you hear how he describes her, you hear her response, and it's so, so beautiful. And so that to me is an example of healthy communication, adoring each other, which you can adore each other and still help each other grow in certain areas to be the most desirable in your spouse's eyes.
Yeah, I love that. So once again, talking about, we're going to wrap this up here in just a little bit, but just this idea of being most desirable, right? That is so key, because sometimes when we're single, we pull out all the stops. We try to look sexy. We try to look good. We're at the gym. We're working out. We're watching what we eat. We want to make sure everything is good. And then when we get married, sometimes, let's be honest, we let our guard down. We just thinking, okay, well, you know what? He's going to love me or she's going to love me just the way I am. Yes, they will love you, but will they be as attracted to you, right? And let's be honest about that, right? So do whatever you can do on your part to try to always remain as attractive as you can to your spouse.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, I mean, they have eyes, right? So try to make sure that you do that. The last thing that we're going to say is to make it a priority in your relationship. God has given us, and this is a good way to kind of bring this all back in, because my wife talked about sex is a beautiful gift from God, right? And it is a beautiful gift. It's God's wedding gift to every couple, right? And when you get married, he gives you this wedding gift. So we need to make sure that it is a priority, because there's a lot of couples who basically just said, you know what, we're just not going to have good sex.
Yes.
Or we're just not going to have sex at all. Matter of fact, I think the statistic for sexless marriage is less than 12 times a year. So if you might be in a sexless marriage and you don't even know it, that's the definition of a sexless marriage, like less than one time a month, right? So that might communicate that you all both either verbally or non-verbally have pretty much communicated, this is no longer a priority for us.
Right.
And if you can easily settle into this complacency where you just accept a second-rate sex life as opposed to actually committing to doing the work and being intentional about actually improving it so that you can really enjoy the gift that God has given you as a couple.
Yes, and through the various seasons that we have been in, through all of the conversations, we have arrived at a very good place of where we are going to be committed to continue to try. It doesn't mean that every opportunity we get, we are going to just arrive at the Holy Land, but we are at least committed to attempting, committing to staying connected, to committing to continuing to shower each other with affirmations, continue to just love each other, but committed to trying and not giving up in the area of intimacy, because it is so easy to focus on everything else and work on everything else, your job, play with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And sex is one of the things that can easily be pushed to the back burner, but it is the most important thing that God gave marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, last bonus tip though, for those of you who
I
hung
knew you
around
had a
all
bonus
this
one in
time.
there.
Yeah, the bonus
you got a
tip
bonus
is
one.
be creative, spice it up, enjoy, explore, learn, do all of those things, right? Like, look, it doesn't matter if you're married 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, try to find new ways to try to learn your spouse, learn their body, their likes, their dislikes, their triggers, their turnoffs, all these different things, right? Spice it up, have a good time. It's God's gift for you. So with all that being said, I hope you all found that helpful. If you want my wife and I to do more videos on this topic of marriage, relationships, dating, let us know in the comment section. Put your comments, your questions down there. And we got some more videos coming soon that we're going to do together. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us.
Yes.
And babe, you want to any final words?
Enjoy the gift of intimacy in marriage.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. All right. We love you guys. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.